This video is about the proxies. Why do we need proxy? Where does it fit in? And how our day-to-day tools interact according to the proxy, right? So this is where the proxy sits in. So I have my home Wi-Fi router. So this is in turn, this is the device essentially connected to my home Wi-Fi router, right? So by the time the Wi-Fi would have already, my router would have already connected to the ISP, and the ISP is a DHCP server, most probably providing a public IP to my router. So it will be just one public IP for my home, and then the router in turn, Wi-Fi router in turn, will set up a LAN. So the 192.0, those private IP sequences. So it will use one of those, and even the router will itself also have a private IP, and then each of my device also will have a private IP. Now, when the request goes from one of my devices, the router knows how to map the response back. So to the same device again. Suppose if I am running a listener, HTTP listener, Tomcat or something over here, and then if some outside through the outside device, if there is a connection being made to my Tomcat, then when a request comes to the Wi-Fi router, it will be on the public IP, right? So the outside client will connect the public IP, and the request comes over here to the router. The router doesn't know which device to forward to. So for that purpose, once you start a Tomcat or some listener on your device, you need to do some setting on the Wi-Fi router, saying that I am running a listener on such a port. So if there is any request for HTTP, for instance, right? So forward those things to me. So yeah, there might be a problem if you're running two Tomcats on device one on port 80, device two or another Tomcat on port 80. There might be a problem here to set up that we need to see later. Okay, with this being said, so now when from a device when we make a request to the through the Wi-Fi router, mm, through the ISP. So now, when I say goes to a specific website, right? So that website will get to know the public IP from which the request is being made. So in order to remain anonymous, all right, so we can use a proxy. So what happens is when the request goes all the way to the Wi-Fi route through the my device router, ISP, and then to the proxy, what the proxy does, the proxy from each packet, in the each packet you have a IP address on top of it. So it will remove the host IP, the public IP of my router, and instead it puts its own public IP there on the proxy. Itself will have a public IP. It will put that IP and forward the request to the say server, say facebook.com, right? The facebook.com provides a response back. So the proxy then routes the request back to the my public IP. That's what the proxy does, right? It can do some caching also in the Meanwhile, it can block some sites, and there is this SSL termination that needs to be discussed further. Can we terminate HTTPS here and just HTTP from here to here? Those things are for further discussion. That depends whether you are using proxy as a load balancer or just for to remain anonymous and all other purposes. So with that being said, so the proxies can be different type. So for example, you have something called a squid proxy. You can use them, right? Squid cache proxy. So this is for home purpose. So you can set up a proxy and tell your laptop, right? Make a setting in your laptop saying that whenever a connection is being made, route it through the proxy, right? So in that case, what happens is the ISP will get to know the, say for example, if you make a HTTP request here, it will get to know the URL and other things. And if it's a HTTPS URL, right? It's HTTPS. So some things will be encrypted, right? But still the IP, the request parameters might be available for the ISP, and then the request goes to the proxy instead of the ISP routing it to the using the routing tables to the target, right? Say, for example, say facebook.com. So instead of the ISP routing it, the request ISP forwards that to the proxy because on my device, when I set the proxy, what happens is any packet being set, that packet will have the proxy IP as the on top of it. So it directly goes over here, and then the proxy in turn uh, routes the traffic. So there are proxies available, like kind of software as a service, right? SaaS solutions. So they are installed. So there are private companies who have installed the proxy. You believe them. So buy their service. Squid is there. Something called local proxy, right? See, they have it. See, they provide location independence, right? It costs you around $20 per month. Those things, right? So these are the things we can use with proxy, the uses of proxy. Now coming to the actual tools. So, okay, my laptop needs to have a setting for the proxy. Where do I do it? So you can go to the network connections and search for a proxy, right? Settings. mm, can you find network here? And then go to the proxy, network and internet. Is there a proxy? Yeah, there is a proxy over here. So automatically detect settings. So in this case, I'm not giving any proxy. So most probably my ISP might act as a proxy. So it might cache few things, or it may not. In that case, there is no proxy involved. So in my official laptop, I do see that there is a manual proxy setup. So automatically detect settings is off. Manual proxy setting is provided, and a pack file is provided. I think it's the automatically detect settings with the setup script, I believe. Script address, something is there. So basically, they have provided a pack file. Pack is nothing but proxy. Uh, pack file, proxy auto configuration file. So this is just a kind of a JS file which can be opened in Notepad as well, right? Which can be opened in Notepad. So it will have a method called find proxy for URL. So this method is going to determine, so depending on the IP in the URL or the DNS, so it can determine whether it has to bypass the proxy or go through a specific proxy, all those things, and finally give you a IP address and port of the proxy to which it has to route through. So that setting can be done over here. So this is at the OS level. So Windows operating system. So you provide a proxy pack file here or a specific IP and port as well. One of them you can do. So this is one that has been set at the OS level. So this is what we are discussing today. What a proxy is, what a proxy at OS level, setting a proxy at OS level, then setting a proxy at the JVM level. This is also quite tricky. So how do you set proxy at the JVM level? Once you start a proxy, once you start a JVM, how do you start a JVM? You start a JVM using Java exe, and then there are some system properties that we can specify, right? So system properties are provided using -d. So -d followed by HTTP, uh, -d followed by HTTP. These are the system property: HTTP.proxy host, HTTP.proxy port. Right, these things we can specify and start. So this uh, JVM picks this up, but user ID password is not provided. Right, depending on. So suppose if you are using Apache HTTP client internally, right? So then that we can provide user password here as well. That will the Apache HTTP client library is able to pick it up. not the plain Java net this one APIs, right? So that's one option. So at the JVM level, so we are providing it as a system property, and came across something called as a Java control panel. So this configure Java is there. So if you go over here in the JRE that you have installed program files Java JRE bin, there is Java CPL.exe, right? This is the Java control panel. So the same thing can be seen over here. If you just type configure Java, open, the same thing opens, Java control panel opens. So this is basically controlling the few things. Browser is using a JVM, so that JVM settings can be controlled over from here, right? So the browser might be running an applet, right? Java, this one. So the JVM used by the control panel, sorry, by the browser, right? For that JVM, some settings can be configured over here. So if you say Java, there is set of JREs available. So I have only one JRE now. So this is the JRE for which I'm doing the setting now. There is some security settings that we can do. Advanced settings are there, but most importantly, the network settings that we're looking into now. Use browser settings or use a proxy server. Use automatic proxy configuration script, the backfire that I told about, or it can be direct connection. So I'm using browser settings. So where does the browser have settings? So earlier browsers used to have a proxy setting. Now if I see in the latest mm, browser, I don't even see that setting. So I can go directly go to settings over here. So if I type say network settings in Chrome, nothing comes up. So suppose I type proxy setting. So this open. So I don't see any way to sit here. So it provides me a link to open your system proxy. That is nothing but what I'm set at the OS level. So the basically browser is pointing to the uh, using the proxy setting done on the OS. Fine. So the same thing happens here. So use browser settings. So my JVM will use the one done by the browser. The browser is not doing it; it's taking from the OS. So that's what is picked up by the JVM. The applet. So that is at the JVM level. So that was not programmatically. Suppose if we have to do it programmatically, the JVM level, then there is another option here. So let me go there. HTTP. Yeah, so these are basically the system properties. So once you start the Java application, you can do system.set property. The same properties can be set, right? That is one option. Or else there is, okay, core Java. So this is the global setting, proxy host, proxy port, or if you're using a SOX proxy, I'll come to that what SOX proxy is. Set by a command line. This is what we saw now. And once you have set this, once you open a URL connection, it will use that proxy system.set property. This is the other option, right? So these are all done for at the JVM level. So any connection, HTTP connection being made will use the same. If you want specifically connection specific proxies, then that can be done programmatically. So you have a URL string. So you have a proxy class provided by Java. So you provide that during opening a HTTP connection. So open connection web proxy. This is one option, right? Programmatically, what else we need to cover? Set proxy over new HTTP connection. We are done. Set proxy on Eclipse. So Eclipse setting proxy on Eclipse. So Eclipse basically um, has to take the proxy setting from the OS, right? So you can go to Windows, Preferences, General Network Connections. So here we can see there will be we can select one of the network options, right? So either it can be direct, manual, native. None of the settings that was stored discovered in the operating system are being used. And then HTTP proxy, so we can provide the HTTP proxy IP port, authorization, user, password also we can provide here. Um, and if it's a SOX proxy, we can provide different one. So this is what we do. So in our company, we have a pack file. We open the pack file, find the returned proxy IP port from that, provide that IP port here, and provide our SSO user and password. So that will authenticate through um, the proxy, right? So that's what Eclipse does. Now, once you have this setting on the Eclipse, so there is a Maven plugin, right, running within your Eclipse that can also make use of it. Or else, if you are not specified it, you can specify it in the Maven settings.xml. So we have the Maven settings.xml where you can provide a proxy element. So it's going to have the protocol, the user ID, password, host port, right, and to bypass all those things provided these, so I will be able to use this proxy. So the whole point of this proxy is, right, so for example, if what they do is usually once they create a LAN or a subnet, within a LAN again there can be subnets, right? So each and every device will not be able to directly go to say some google.com or some Facebook. So because their routing tables are not configured in such a way, right? They're internal. So they have a single place. They will have a single place through which all the internet traffic, either incoming or outgoing, passes through. So this proxy is sitting on top of all of our uh, it's like a facade for the right. So you have to pass through it. So you are hidden to the outside world. So now without the proxy, so say if I'm running Maven on my local, so Maven tries to connect to the central repo, it will not be able to make that connection, right? The DNS IP connection, DNS will not be able to lookup will not happen. It will not be able to find the IP. It will not be able to make the connection unless Maven goes through this proxy, right? So because it's like just like a LAN, internal LAN. So you will not have that connection. Only if you go through that proxy, you will be able to make the connection. So that's the reason. Either Eclipse, right? Eclipse has a lot of plugins which needs to be downloaded. For that, we need proxy settings. Maven also same thing. It has to connect to the central repo and download the artifacts. For that we need the proxy setting. So if Eclipse if you are doing at the Eclipse level, so the Maven plugin should be able to Maven plugin or yeah, Maven plugin, even if you're using external Maven, not the one installed with Eclipse, right? So if you're even that should be able to pick up, or else if you're not done at the Eclipse level, do it in the settings.xml, then go to your in the window, Eclipse window, settings, Maven, you go provide user settings, provide this file there. So the proxy from this will be picked up and connection will be made. So that's with respect to Eclipse, Maven, and what I found was, suppose I'm just running Maven on my command prompt, right? So is it possible that Maven takes the uh, proxy setting on my OS? No, I didn't see any way of doing it, provided specifying it as native. So I have to explicitly provide it. That's with respect to Maven. Then coming to Spring Boot app. Spring Boot app. Okay, Spring Boot app is again nothing but a JVM, right? It spans up a new JVM, its own Tomcat server, right? So yeah, still we can use the same option. We can still, when we start up the Spring Boot jar, hmm, what we can do, we can still provide this as a Java system property. That is one option. But what we have seen is for the Spring Boot to pick up it, yeah, this host and port, it needs an additional system property called HTTP proxy set is equal to true. This is an additional thing required in Spring Boot. For plain JVM, it's not required. And then that should be it. But some other people suggesting you may have to use server.use forward headers, true, all those things. No, not much into this. We'll look into that later. So while starting the Spring Boot application, you can still provide a system property, one option, right? So I haven't found a way to provide in the application properties or something like that, right? But what I found was there is something called Spring Dev Spring Boot Dev Tools, right? We may have to look it later. So this may help us in providing some settings to the Spring Boot application pro, like um, without restart, right? Okay, so Spring Boot app, same system properties, or else you may have to, if you're using Apache HTTP, so right, so there is that java.net, so even the Java net APIs, right? Java.net use uh, system proxies is equal to true. So this is one system property we can use, right, for a plain JVM. Um, Using this, if you have the system property set saying that use system properties is equal to true, so then my JVM will pick it up from the OS, right? Till now what we were doing, I told you that the only way was providing through the system property. Instead of that, we can provide it, if you just specify this use system properties, system proxies, it will pick it up from there. So in this case, no need to provide these two properties, right, explicitly. Proxy host and proxy port is not required, right? That is one option. Now coming to the programmatic, suppose system.set property is one option, or else per connection you are trying to do something. So suppose you are assume that you are using a REST template. So one option is when you are creating the REST template. So we need to that REST template. Let me come over here. See, this is the uh, REST template that I'm creating here, right? So this template, I'm setting a request factory. That request factory is HTTP components client HTTP request factory, to which I'm setting a closable HTTP client. So this is nothing but an abstraction, Spring HTTP client abstraction over the Apache Commons HTTP client. So here, if you see client builder, new system properties, then client builder setting proxy, set default credentials provider. So this is where we provide the proxy user and password. Proxy host port we have provided. All these things are set in the HTTP client builder authentication strategy, right? The client builder we have provided, that client builder we are setting into a request factory, HTTP request factory. That request factory goes into the REST template. The REST template internally uses the request factory and all these things internally. And when you make a request through REST template, and when it establishes the connection, it uses the proxy, port, all those things, authentication strategies. So that is with respect to the REST template. Okay, set proxy for Postman. So Postman is also pretty simple. So if you go to the if you have installed Postman, go to the settings. So default proxy configuration, Postman uses systems configurations by default to connect any online services or send API requests. So by default, it also uses the system level provided. Alright. Uh, Proxy configuration for sending requests, use system proxy. So if at all you want, you can specify manually here. Add a custom proxy configuration. If you want, you can provide it and provide your proxy user IP port, all those things, or else by default it will pick it up from the OS. So that's with respect to the proxies. Later on we'll cover other aspects. So I think we are good for now. We have covered these aspects today. That's it for now. Jai Shri Ram.